Okay, I'm Rex with OEM Products. Welcome to 2024. Hope you guys are having a good year. So we've been asked for a schedule of maintenance and things that we do when we do bring a machine in, or someone sends a machine in to us for repair, for maintenance or service. Let's go over this machine and let's just show you what we do whenever we look at a machine. We're very thorough. First thing we do when we're going to be bringing a machine in off of a trailer that someone has delivered, or we're lifting a machine off of a pallet, we want to make sure before we start the engine that we do have engine coolant, we have engine oil, we have hydraulic oil, so we don't start up a machine that somebody's already started a service work on and maybe didn't put lubrication back in it. So let's verify that this thing does have engine oil and stuff, and then we'll get to it. All right, so let's pull this side panel off. What we're working on today is a GM 2.4 liter engine. This is the latest engine that we're using. You can see here we do have coolant, so we're good on the engine coolant. Let's check the engine oil. We do have plenty of engine oil in it. Verify we do have a good amount of hydraulic oil. And yes, we do have a level of hydraulic oil. So if we do need to reposition the machine, or we do need to operate the hydraulics during this testing, we do know that we have the proper fluid levels and we can go ahead and safely operate that. So let's go ahead and pull all of the access panels loose, and let's dive into this and see if we can see anything wrong with it. Okay, so we're going to turn this ignition on and we're going to see what hours are. So there's 1.4 hours on this engine. It's not ready for an oil change yet. But we're going to check our voltage. That's 11.6 before the engine is started. I'm going to start the engine. Now we have 13.8 volts. So the alternator is charging correctly. Okay, we know that this engine only has about 67, 68 hours on it, but we're going to inspect this filter anyway. We don't know what kind of environment that it's been in. It is normal to see a little bit of dust on the filter media. If you can visibly see dust in there, you know you need to change it. If it has, a couple hundred hours on it, you can change it. If it only has 20 hours on it, but it's extremely dirty, then we would go ahead and change it. It's not quite as susceptible to high emissions as some of our other units are, but you can see this one here has been a very dirty environment. We've got some dust in there, and for the low cost of these, I think I'd go ahead and change it. This machine, we normally mark on the end of our filters. If we do change an air filter, oil filter, or a hydraulic filter, we'll denote how many hours were on the engine and what the date was. Now this one here was the original one at 0 hours in June of last year. So like again, 67 hours is not too bad, but we do have a lot of dust. Before this machine goes out on another rental, we'll probably change this out. Okay, after we either change this or whatever, we're going to put this back in. I don't normally recommend blowing them out because we've seen some, on the smaller machines, we'll get higher emissions after blowing one than we do if we're putting a new one in. So we recommend a new filter. And then whenever we go back together with this, we just make sure that this is seated properly all the way up 100%. And then close the latches. and we're ready to go to the next thing. So we're going to start here at the back of the machine on the right hand side, and we're just going to verify that all these hose clamps are tightened up. There's not any weeping. We're going to look at these hose clamps on the air intake, make sure there's not loose or been damaged. If this machine was on a ceramic tile job or has been on a ceramic tile job previous, then there's a lot of vibrations happening, a lot of bouncing around. So we would want to check all of the mounts for mounting this radiator mechanism. We've got these bolts, some up here, some on the bottom. And importantly, we want to look inside of here, because this fan is pushing air through the radiator out, it's pushing air through there. We want to check this side of the radiator for any debris. When they're doing carpet or ceramic tile, whatever, we get a lot of dirt, dust, fuzz. It'll stick to those radiator fins. And so that's why we would take this back panel off so we can pressure wash all that and blow all that out with compressed air. So we're just looking for anything that may have come loose, any of these, maybe a wire tie that secure these wires to make sure that nothing's loose and banging around, maybe rubbing on a belt, rubbing on a pulley. We're looking to make sure all of these fittings up here are good and sealed up. There's not any oil leaks in any of these hoses, any drips. If you can catch these leaks as they start, then you can prevent a mess and then getting all the dirt accumulating on all the wet spots. Okay, so we're going to look at the spark plugs on this GM 2.4 liter engine. The manual says recommended change intervals on the spark plugs is 2,000 hours or 1,000 hours if it's a very harsh in conditions. Spark plug wire is at 800. So we're going to take this wiring harness loose from the coil pack. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to take the retaining bolt out of the coil. Pull the coil, which is going to come up with spark plug wire. We're going to pull it out, put it to the side. And just using a 5/8 spark plug socket, I'm going to drop that down in there. Being careful not to break the ceramic on the spark plug. And we just pull that out of there with a magnet, and then we can either inspect it or replace it. Okay, so we're going to inspect all of the mechanism on the shifter. Now, just wiggling this, I can tell there is something loose in here that should not have that much of a movement. We're going to pull this loose so we can see this mechanism. And as you can see right here on this bolt, it is loose. So we just need to tighten this bolt up. So we're going to move down into this portion here and see, and we're going to check and make sure all these rod ends, these nuts are tight on both the lower and the upper for the right control and the left control. And as you can see, this one here is loose, and we would need to tighten that up. Everything else seems to be tight. And we're going to inspect our shock absorbers here, make sure they're tight. We also have these rod ends here that we would make sure these bolts and nuts are tight and these jam nuts are tight on both sets of these linkages. We're just inspecting all of these secure hardware that is going to be tight. While we're here, we're going to look and make sure there's not any oil residue on these fittings. If there is, then maybe we need to tighten these up. We're going to look around the top of the tank, and we're also going to inspect and make sure that our oil is at the proper level. Okay, we're also looking at these set screws in this bearing. This is not a high-speed bearing. It only makes about 1/4 of a turn. But we do need to ensure that these screws are tight. so that this mechanism can't slide back and forth like this. So we would position that where it's in the center of the shifter mechanism, and then we secure these two on this bearing, and then there should be two on this bearing here also. Okay, so while we have the seat up, we can see that these two pins are installed in the top pin of this hydraulic cylinder. We do see these bolts that hold the track mechanism to the seat. We see these come loose occasionally, and so in order to tighten those up, we can take this seat completely off, and we can tighten these up here. There's 4 of those. And then we would make sure that these bolts are tight that hold the tracks down. Okay, so whenever we remove this panel, there's not a lot to look at here. Maybe just ensure that this is your throttle wiring. Make sure it's inserted all the way. And then we're going to check in these hoses and make sure there's not any oil weeping off of this. Looking on this flat area for any oil residue on here, so we can kind of look up and find where that oil leak may be. And then we want to look here at the movement we have in this joystick. There seems to be something loose in here. That should not be that much movement. So we're going to lift this boot up and out of the way, and we're going to locate where this movement is. And it looks like this nut is loose on this mechanism here, so we could tighten that up and then reinstall the boot properly on the joystick. Okay, so we also, while we're in this area, I usually just reach my hand in and grab these and make sure that if I can touch these and push them and they will come loose, that means that they were not very tight to begin with. So I just look at these and make sure that I can't move any of these hoses up and down and then start the removal of that hose or leaking. So we always check that. Okay, so this is our high pressure hydraulic filter. We normally change the oil and the filter at about 250, 300 hours. This one here does not need to be changed, but if it did need to be changed, you can unscrew this top. You're generally going to get some residue that's going to come over the top of that, make a little bit of a mess. I've already prepared for that. Put an absorbent pad below it so we don't make too big of a mess. So once we get this unscrewed, we can pull this up, and that's what our filter looks like. We just pull this piece off, put a new one on, and then we're ready to put it back in. And then we make a mess so we can clean it up later. Okay, so if you do find that it is time to service the oil, you change the oil filter, and we're going to drain the oil out. We're going to pull this hose outside of the frame and place it into a bucket. And then we're going to lift up on this lever and then pull it to the side, and that'll begin the flow of oil coming out. And then whenever it's finished, you can put the hose back up inside the frame, and you're ready for your next oil change. Okay, again, we go back to how many hours that the hour meter says, and then we generally write it on the oil filter itself whenever the last oil change was. This one here is only, again, 67 hours, so we're not going to change it yet. We're going to wait 100 hours. And then, so you would just unscrew this, put oil on the seal of a new one, screw it back on, and add oil to the engine, and you're ready to go again. Okay, so we've determined that we are full of coolant. We do have enough here. This is a full level whenever it's cold. But I would like to test the level at which the concentration of the coolant is, so that we can determine if it's okay to send to a really cold environment, good for the winter. So we're going to take this top cap off the radiator, and we're going to use our coolant measuring device. We're going to get some of the coolant right out of the radiator, and we're going to check and make sure that it is good for whatever environment that it needs to go to, whether it's hot or cold. So the other areas of concern on this engine would be, do we have any exhaust leaks around any of these gaskets? This vibration isolator here, exhaust gasket here, exhaust gasket here. We're looking for, are these coolant hoses tight? Is there any weeping of coolant? Making sure there's not any wires rubbing on the fan blade or belts. We're going to check the belt tension, and we're also looking inside of the radiator on the back side here, making sure that we don't have any debris in there, not any fuzz or dust or carpet strings or anything inside. So we're also looking here at any of these mounts that are securing the radiator on the top and on the bottom. We're going to make sure these bolts are tight here and here. That is a point of concern when we're doing some of the rougher applications. Okay, so whenever you are pressure washing the radiator out, you want to make sure that your hose, your stream is directly into the radiator, not from the side and not from the top, not from the bottom. You want to go directly into it, and keep yourself a safe distance away so you're not sending all that pressure and bending the fins on the radiator. And then once you spray out all of the concrete dust and dirt and particles, then you're going to go back and dry that with compressed air. And do the same thing. Keep it straight, keep it far enough away where you're not damaging the radiator. Okay, so one of the other things that we're going to ensure is when we turn the key on, you should see the fan come on the newer machines. The older machines, we employed a thermostat that would cycle the fan on and off, but we find that people are more reassured if they hear the fan running and they know when it's not, so they know that there's a problem with the fan itself. So we're going to verify that. Fan is running, and we can go in and we can inspect to make sure there's not a lot of debris buildup on the cooler for the hydraulic system. And if there is, we can blow that out with compressed air. So while we're in this area, we can just check all these fasteners, make sure where the propane tank brackets are being, make sure they're secure, make sure that the bolts securing the mounting bracket to the top of the cowling is tight, and then all the bolts holding the fan and the cooler in. Just, touch every single bolt with your hands and make sure that it's tight. Okay, so in order to inspect properly the tilt cylinders, if they're leaking, hoses leaking underneath the machine, or tilt cylinder pins, or the lower lift cylinder, we need to extend them out, tilt this blade down, and when we can get under there with a light and see what's going on. Okay, so we've got the cotter pins here and here in these tilt cylinder bolts, tilt cylinder pins, and then we also have them here. Occasionally those will come loose and fall out. We have cotter pins in these pins here, cotter pin over here. These are the twist lockout feature bolts. Those are both in there. It doesn't look like they're tight. But we also have, while we're in here, we're going to look at the shape of this wheel, and if this wheel has a flat spot in it, or if it's been, all the rubber is off of it, the urethane, then we want to replace that. And then while we have this, we have a grease zert right here on this caster that we can grease while it's up in the air there. There's also 2 additional bolts here that we like to inspect and make sure that these 2 are tight, and we usually get those pretty tight with an impact wrench. So in order to remove the tires, to inspect behind the tires, looking for carpet strings or any kind of debris that may be endangering the seals on our wheel motors, we already have the machine tilted down, And so it basically lifts up the frame in this area high enough that we can lower it down, and that'll rest the machine on the 4x4 and lift the tires off the ground. And we're going to verify that there's not any debris behind this axle, not any debris up on top of this that could interfere with the hydraulic hoses, or we're also looking for any kind of suspicious oil residue on top of this where these hoses connect to the wheel motor. While we're here, you can take note of there's a hole here to allow you access to that greaser to grease the blade bar on each side. There's one on each side. So we can go ahead and grease that while we have it in this position. Okay, so anytime we get a machine in here, we want to make sure that when it does go on the job site, it is 100% ready to go. And one of the things that we want to ensure is the health of the battery. And we do have a device here that's going to tell us, it's like a $25 tool we bought from a local supply house, an automotive supply house. And you can put this on, select a couple of options, and it'll tell you how many amp hours your battery has available, what the cold cranking amps are. So there's our voltage. We're going to select the cold cranking amps. This one here is 750, I believe. So we're going to raise this up to 750 cold cranking amps. And then we'll test it. And this one here is saying it has 1,054 cold cranking amps. So we're in really good shape on this battery. It's a new battery anyway. So that tells us whenever the customer goes out on the job with this, he's not going to get a surprise from a weak battery.